economic progress can't happen if property rights aren't well defined. If you don't have good property rights, you waste a lot of resources just trying to accomplish things in your life.
Welcome to Reality Check with Elena, a video podcast to inspire you. We challenge mainstream narratives and promote critical thinking by revealing the naked, often inconvenient reality on the ground. My guest in this episode is Charles Calomiris, a globally influential economist, expert in international finance, specializing in crisis of equilibria. He is the Henry Kaufman Professor of Financial Institutions Emeritus at Columbia University. Good morning, Charlie. How are you?
I'm doing well, Ellen.
You're doing well. You being a scholar, an economist, a professor, a scholar of economic history, somebody who has studied also why equilibriums break, crises.
Yes.
So I'd like to ask you, we are right in the 21st century in a time of turbulence. Turbulence because all the way from Gen Z to the G7, people are questioning the models that we're working and using so far. People are wondering whether capitalism works, whether economics matter. We question banking, bankers, finance. How do you think about all these criticism? And do you think actually, in a short response, do you think that it's valid?
I think we have to focus on the big picture. By the big picture, I mean, let's look at the last 200 years. What have we learned? Well, what we've learned is that improvement in human well-being, material well-being, and in human rights is possible. In fact, dramatic improvements. We economic historians sometimes refer to the period after 1800 as the hockey stick, because for all of human history prior to 1800, the economic welfare per capita was pretty much near subsistence level and constant. Okay, there were some improvements here and there, but not perpetual growth improvement.
Very true.
What happened after 1800 is under a certain regime in which markets are able to operate and in which human rights exist, all kinds of rights, economic rights and political rights, what you see is enormous and perpetual progress, the likes of which the world has never seen. It's not just about Britain or just about America. It's about Chile. It's about Korea. It's about Thailand even. It's about Botswana.
Japan.
It's about Japan. And that is a story that has, I think, absolute relevance for poor people still. And in fact, I would say that the 1990s were an important decade in which prior to that, there was a lot of doubt about whether international trade and openness to markets could really be transformational for poor countries. What's interesting is the experience of the 1990s and early 2000s really put to rest that question. Absolutely, if you can structure institutions to be able to participate in global capitalism, you can cause not just economic growth for the rich, but transformational economic growth for poor people. And we've seen that happen. So it's no longer a question, really. I agree with you that there are lots of doubts, and there are lots of good reasons for doubts. But I think that if we start with the big picture of good institutions which can make progress possible, I could say that we've never really seen an example where when you structure the good institutions, the improvement doesn't happen. It always happens.
Okay, so that thank you for your answer, because you're helping me go to the next one, which is I personally, being myself an economist, identify that yes, extreme poverty has reduced, but all of that is also due to the fact that we have had great evolution in technology, yeah?
Yes.
And medicine. However, what used to be called poverty, now it's far bigger and it's called informality. And we have 70% of the world that is living in an insecure structure.
Right.
So, how do you, with your study of history, how do you see the importance of changing it? And what would you think that is pivotal for that to occur?
Oh, it's foundational. So in fact, you know, as an economist, we sometimes take this for granted, but Ronald Coase is most known for something called the Coase theorem. What is the
Nobel Prize winner?
Yes. What is the Coase theorem? And many economists misunderstand the Coase theorem. They think that he's saying that economic progress will always happen because people will always do it. No, that's not the point of the Coase theorem. The point of the Coase theorem is economic progress can't happen if property rights aren't well defined.
Thank you.
And now, so it's a foundational element of economic theory. We're all taught it. All economists are taught the centrality of the Coase theorem. However, the question is, where do property rights come from?
We kind of take them for granted.
Yeah.
We've been educated to assume that we live in countries where property rights are there.
Yeah, well, they can be there as a statement of the law, but that doesn't mean that they're there in practice.
Thank you. So here is my other point, which I want to concentrate a bit. The whole development infrastructure paradigm that was created with the Bretton Woods in 1945. Do you think it's actually continues to be appropriate? Because I believe in that the Bretton Woods establishment was very much based on a bit of an assumption that a lot of these institutional fundamentals are there. So we were basically working more on building again the infrastructure that was destroyed after the war.
Right.
Fixing, the basics in terms of providing water, going from point A to point B, or roads, or bridges. And I think now, after the end of the Cold War, where are we?
Yeah. Well, I think that thinking has evolved a lot, and it's a very complex question. So I'm just going to answer two pieces of it. So first of all, note that the IMF's main achievement was its first achievement, which was to reestablish the foundational elements that would allow international trade to occur. And that was really the IMF's mission right after World War II.
And that's basically all it's done, which is fantastic.
Exactly. I agree, but it's a big thing to
It's a big thing.
To reestablish an order for transacting the infrastructure, the plumbing, if you like, of global trade to make it possible. That was a great accomplishment. And after that, and especially after the system that they were founded to assume, the fixed exchange rate system, collapsed, they really have been searching for a mission and frankly have become the slush fund of the G7 finance ministers. And that's not a very good mission, but that's their current mission.
Well, I want to applaud you and thank you because you're saying it and not me, but I'm in complete agreement.
Yeah, and the World Bank started with a wrong thinking. But it started at a time when global capital markets were completely non-existent.
Correct.
They used to exist prior to World War I. But after the mess of World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, because of the collapse of international trade, international capital markets also go away because you can't have capital markets across borders if there isn't also some way to pay back the capital through international trade. So the World Bank's vision of international trade was very mechanical, was thinking that the problem was you needed to give capital to countries and then it would develop, like a recipe. And then the World Bank, I would say, is searching for mission two, and it's trying to do some kind of positive things. But I think that there are fundamental problems where it also is effectively now a slush fund for the G7. So I think that the main Bretton Woods institutions, in the case of the World Bank, it was basically based on a kind of false understanding of economic development. In the case of the IMF, they did some improvement, but then they accomplished their mission, and unfortunately, they weren't really able to articulate a coherent mission since then. But I don't think it's so relevant because the world is still progressing, and countries are progressing on their own. When I worked in Mexico, I've worked in maybe 30 countries. When I worked in Mexico, I was there on a World Bank mission. And then I came as a private consultant separately. And they also had the Chilean, this was at the banking regulatory body, and they had the Chileans there also advise him. That's where they got the good advice. Okay, because they
were the practitioners that had already done the work.
And they saw what worked. And the Chileans learned the hard way. And they had a major banking crisis in 1981 to 83. They learned the hard way, and they were the first to really reform banking regulation effectively in the mid-1980s. Since then, they've been teaching countries all throughout Latin America and beyond how to think about what real effective reforms are. And so I think that we don't depend on the World Bank and the IMF. We have advisors coming from the private sector, from academia, but also, most importantly, successes that they see from other countries. And I think there's a lot of reason for hope. We've actually had a lot of successful reforms. For example, even though there's been a lot of volatility in Brazil since the 1990s, think about the transformation that happened. A country that had the worst hyperinflations, the worst mismanagement of the complete lack of rule of law for 200 years, the worst on the globe. All of a sudden, through these reforms that Cardoso implements in the 1990s, somehow those reforms make a difference. You go from extreme corruption to much less corruption. And I think that this is really an interesting question. By the way, I know we're in Greece, so we should talk a little bit about Greece. What is the major impediment to improving things from the standpoint of the informal sector, getting rid of corruption, and also establishing property rights? The number one problem is people have to believe that their participation in the reforms could possibly work. Trust. They have to believe that it can work. What Cardoso was so good at was articulating as a leader what the existing equilibrium was of corruption, of lack of property rights, of bad public governance, bad private governance, what an equilibrium would be that's different.
Correct.
Which everybody in Brazil agreed about. All he was doing was acting as a voice for their common perceived beliefs. And then telling them, this is the harder part, what's the path to go from one to the other, and then showing them examples of it. Let me give you the most obvious, simple example. I know you've worked in many countries and you've done many reforms too. The one in Brazil that really articulated it so clearly for people is, I'm going to pay mothers to send their kids to school. Now, you'll get no economic benefit from that for 20 years.
Well, you get a better generation.
Yes, but not for 20 years. Not for 20 years, right? And so, first of all, you're saying, I believe in inclusion, real inclusion, of teaching people skills so that they're going to have a future. I believe in that. And I'm going to, as your president, I'm going to do it in a way that I can't get any benefit. I know the economy is not going to grow next year or the next 3 years to make me look good for a re-election or something, right? That's not going to happen. That's a very interesting leadership action. Taking a policy that people can see is institutional for education and showing them that you are focused on the long term, but then reminding them
that it is actually useful.
That's very useful, but that every politician who tells you that you don't need to be fiscally responsible is a thief and a liar. And so he says, one leg of our progress is going to be inclusion with a long-term focus on things that really matter in institutions. The other leg is going to be fiscal responsibility. And if anyone tells you, including me, that I'm going to make you rich in 4 years, you know he's a liar. So he's articulating to people things and showing them a path that makes sense. Even though Brazil has had a lot of ups and downs, even though they had Lula as their president and have him now again, and despite the checkered past, there's been fundamental, irreversible positive change. Brazilian inflation has remained low.
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay, but this is not, let's not take it for granted. It's remained low for more than 2 decades, now almost 3 decades.
Think about the big transformation, which I think is even more notable with the other country on the other side, Peru. where Peru had a hyperinflation
Yes.
of 1,000,000% a year, minus 17% GDP growth. In other words, they were in deep recession. And it's a country that has had 7 to 10 presidential changes in the last 10 years. Yet their middle class has grown so much because of the property rights reforms. I don't like to call them reforms because, as you said, in law they exist, but they were never implemented. So the transformation of a country is extraordinary when you actually give them a right of existence by very simplified ways. And what I found myself as a policymaker in this regard is that history played an important role for me to understand the number of players involved in a transformation requirement, in the implementation of transforming it. Some of them were latent, some of them were obvious. The number of historical interventions that had actually stopped reforms of property rights or of affiliate elements. Once you identify all this, then it's much easier to figure out what type of levers you can change. So you can create the proper incentives for the citizens to start creating trust to the state. Because no citizen trusts the state. Citizens in all the countries I worked with expect from the politician-elect to return back the favor of the vote they casted. So in a way, democracy is kind of like changed its way since Pericles built the Acropolis and democracy was established. In other words, today we cast a vote as a client and we're saying we're expecting something and it's going to be a short-term expectation. And the politician that I just voted for, he better remember that expectation and promise. Yeah?
But there are exceptions. I mean, you don't have to, you're right that this is, I think, very common. But the real transformations that occur when a politician adopts a different role, not the manager of a clientele, but the leader of a country. And I think that Cardoso is an extremely important example because he just articulates to people what in their hearts they already know. He points out that they're in an equilibrium. Look, the biggest problem if you're in a corrupt equilibrium is you look around and everyone around you is doing the same thing. They're participating in the corruption. And they can't imagine that it can end because it's a very stable equilibrium.
Correct. Informality is a stable equilibrium.
Very stable. However, they also, if you tell them, say, look, if you don't have good property rights, you waste a lot of resources just trying to accomplish things in your life, right? The biggest the reforms that you participated in that were path-breaking in Peru had major effects on women's ability to participate in the labor force.
Absolutely.
Had major effects on children's ability to get schooling because they didn't have good property rights. They had to sit at home to guard their home because they didn't have a proper ownership right to their home.
And somebody had to always stay home while the father and mother would go work.
And this is transformational, such a simple thing, right? I think that that when people experience this, as you're pointing out for Peru, once they have the taste of what it is to enjoy truly good institutions like property, they're not going to change. They might understand that they're going to elect some people one way or the other, but they're going to do all they can to defend what they have once they experience it. And so I think the most important thing to say to Greeks right now is transformation is possible, and give them examples. Brazil's an example. Chile's an example. Hong Kong's a great example. Hong Kong was in the 1970s, the most corrupt place in the planet. But they established institutional changes. Now, it's not just pass a law. It's not just snap your fingers. But here's what you have to do, okay? Wake up. You have to study what worked before and then try to imitate it. And I've been saying this since the Greek crisis. I've been saying to people, look, I know you're frustrated with the corrupt existence of this shadow economy, all of this. Yes, of course, it's a big problem, but don't just give up. Why do you think Greece can't do what Hong Kong did? Why do you think Greece can't do what Brazil did? You know, Brazil sent the current president to prison because he was a criminal. Many people say, oh, see, politicians are criminals. No, the right thing to say is, they sent someone to jail. That was the first time that ever happened. Congratulations. They've changed the legal system.
Yeah.
And that's a persistent change. It's not perfect, but it's a big improvement. Big improvements happen. Look at, in Africa, you might say, oh, Africa, it's all a basket case. It's not all a basket case. Look at Botswana. So what's the key is looking at what works and trying to establish a process that will imitate it. And it's not so hard. It's not trivial. It's not easy, but it's not something that can't be done. You have this moment now where you have a supermajority in the parliament. You can do real change. But here's the question. Do you have someone who can be like a Cardoso, who can talk about long-term changes, prioritize the long-term changes, not just the clientele stuff, not just give payoff to their constituents for short-term stuff, but to actually prioritize the long-term things and establish a credible vision. And speaking is very important. Saying what the vision is, telling people, look, I know that all politicians have been thieves. Anyone who tells you they're going to do something for you quickly is a thief. Don't believe them. And we're going to be fiscally responsible. And Greece has a big problem. You have to work out from under your debt burden. So it's going to be a big issue. And in a world of rising interest rates and likely, I would say, recessionary forces going forward in the next year, even though Greece is in a great position, that public debt problem is going to get worse. So you have a lot of challenges, but you can overcome them. But you can't overcome them without leadership. If you're in this clientele thinking that you're talking about, which most democracies have for most times, you'll miss your opportunity.
I completely agree with you. Now, as policymakers, and you're aware of my engagement of reality check analysis, which is basically your interest in history and my interest, which I use history, and my interest in learning from history and then placing it in a model, the variables I learned from, so that everybody can be in a checks and balance situation.
Right,
if you're a democracy, and there is always, it's interesting because I was also a politician at some time.
I know.
So you're in a democracy, and then you're sitting there and you're thinking, oh wow, suddenly I have power. You're a policymaker and you feel that you have power. Imagine being in government. Yeah. So it is a bit, it is drinking. It's like becoming a drunk suddenly, right? So how do you get to the sober moment every single day? And I feel reality check analysis helps you because it reminds you how previous engaged parties, leaders without appetite for reform have actually failed, because leadership is not just enough good talk. And it helps you realize that if you don't deliver services with trust to the individuals, the citizens are your worst. The same clients who brought you there are the ones who are going to pull you out.
I think it's you're articulating the exact concern, and I know whether you're in a business or you're in government, the biggest problem, of course, is every day you've got the phone ringing off the hook with a current pressing problem that's just about today. And so a real leader has to find a way to create space for long-term reform implementation as the top priority, which means that you are not being distracted by just short-term today's problems. Doesn't mean that you're blind to today's problems, but it means that you have to use your moment to make the long-term changes. I don't know whether that's going to happen. It's rare when it does happen, but it can happen.
That's why we say the case of Peru, the case of Chile, the case of Brazil.
There are lots of cases.
Well, I want to really thank you.
Sure.
It is a moving and exciting moment for me because, of course, you're an extraordinary thinker, but you're an extraordinary human.
Oh, thanks.
You're all around 360. It's really exciting, and I'm very happy that you're part of our Thoughts for Action.
It's an honor to be with you, too.
No, my gosh. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for the next episode. Support